Hey guys, tonight's absolutely thrilling episode is about Rome. Yes, that white marbled, philosophy quoting, Senate filled poster child for civilization. You know, the place your high school textbook called the cradle of Western values. Sure, if by values you mean backroom deals, forbidden pleasures, and a social scene so decadent, it makes modern Vegas look like a nunnery. Because behind the toga and the laurel wreath wasn't a society busy inventing democracy, but rather a grand, gold-plated stage for secrets, scandals, and vices that would make a reality show producer blush. Pause. Welcome to 7 Scandalous Roman Vices, forbidden knowledge, shocking revelations, and more. Tonight, we rip the mask off history's most adored empire and find out what really drove its mighty pulse. A toxic cocktail of dark humor, forbidden intimacy, unfiltered savagery, strange rituals, and science that would terrify your high school chemistry teacher. Our thesis: ancient Rome's so-called greatness had a very dirty secret. Underneath all those marble columns and epic speeches, the real heartbeat was driven by vice. Loud, proud, and highly profitable. Pause, but let's not just lob accusations at the world's most famous city without evidence. Let's dive right in, feet first, into vice number 1, carnal commerce. Forget the sanitized textbook euphemisms of companionship or great love affairs. We're talking about the Romans' booming business in pleasure for hire, from sacred temples to dingy street corners. Greece might have invented democracy, but Rome industrialized service. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Well, if you really want to know what that meant, brace yourself. Pause, because counterintuitive as it sounds, selling intimacy in Rome wasn't just tolerated. It was state-sanctioned, omnipresent, and sometimes even considered holy. And here's where the logic really jumps off a cliff. If you were an average Roman in the 1st century AD, you probably didn't blink at temple companions or the 100,000-strong street workforce, all peddling what polite historians might call favors. What could possibly go wrong? Pause, let's start with the sacred. Because in Rome, even the gods wanted their cut of the action. Enter the temple of Venus Uracina on the slopes near Rome, where sacred attendants provided divine intimacy as a religious offering. That's right. In a shocking inversion of modern morals, getting up close with a temple companion was a way of thanking the gods, not disobeying them. The ancient poet Propertius, writing around 25 BC, casually mentions lovers seeking the favor of Venus before heading home, like grabbing takeout, but for your soul. Pause, and if the gods blessed it, who was going to argue with the business model? Rome's Lupinaria, better known as pleasure dens, sprouted on every street, from the suburban slums to the bustling marketplaces of Pompeii. Pliny the Elder, a man more famous for cataloging volcanoes, counted more than 45 such service houses on a single main road. That was in Pompeii alone, a city with a population barely rivaling a modern suburb. Graffiti, boldly scrawled on brothel walls, advertised prices, staff specialties, and in one memorable case, a recommendation for Felix the Greek. Now that's customer service. Pause, but Roman carnal commerce wasn't limited to hidden corners or unmarked doors. The meretrices, or professional companions for hire, were sometimes even licensed by the state and required to wear specific togas of a different color. Because nothing says dignity like mandatory uniforms for your profession, right? Take Julia Felix, the infamous entrepreneur of 1st century Pompeii, whose hospitality estate included pleasure rooms, baths, and landscaped gardens for the ultimate all-inclusive experience. Move over all-you-can-eat buffet. Pause, the famous Lex Julia, introduced by Augustus himself around 18 BC, tried brilliantly to regulate moral chaos. Augustus thought, let's control vice with bureaucracy, because Roman rulers always had the best ideas. The law supposedly aimed to keep the Roman family pure, but in practice, it weaponized shame and forced fallen women to register as professionals, which, if anything, spread the business wider. Need proof? By the time of Emperor Caligula in the 1st century AD, the palace itself was rumored to double as a luxury den of pleasure, where the emperor allegedly acted not just as patron but as host. Pause, and let's not pretend for a second this was a victimless, saucy sitcom. The Roman economy for hire was powered by an army of slaves, foreigners, and destitute citizens, many bought and sold on the open market. One estimate from scholarly research suggests tens of thousands participated in the city's pleasure industry at any given time, an astonishing number in a city that rarely topped 1 million residents, a trade so vast that the Emperor Domitian was forced to issue special nighttime patrols just to police the streets, proving that even Rome's strongest lawmen couldn't keep up with demand. Pause, but maybe it wasn't all forced labor and street-level entrepreneurship. There's always that Roman twist. Some professionals, like Volumnius Cytheris, the famed performer companion of Mark Antony, achieved celebrity status, holding sway in political intrigues and feasting with senators. Cytheris even appeared publicly with Antony on his ceremonial platform, a move so scandalous it launched gossipy parchment newsletters across the empire. Talk about going viral. Pause, let's not forget the spintrii, Rome's very own tokens for purchasing pleasure, stamped with scenes so graphic, even modern archaeologists have needed a cold beverage after cataloging them. These coins, sometimes used as entry tokens or discrete payments, highlight just how transactional Rome's approach to intimacy really was. Forget your credit card. Just flash your spintria and proceed to the room with the mosaics you like best. Efficiency at its finest. Pause, still feeling nostalgic for the virtuous days of Western Civ. Here's a real chestnut. Elite Romans, including Cicero, Ovid, and even Augustus' daughter, Julia, found themselves ensnared in scandals involving high society's own discreet companions. Julia the Younger, exiled for loose morals in 8 AD, reportedly hosted poetry readings, where the main event wasn't reciting verse. Cicero, that champion of republic virtue, grumbled about Rome's unrestrained freedoms, while admitting to frequenting certain establishments for philosophical inspiration. Brilliant decision-making all around. Pause, of course, the average Roman citizen wasn't immune. The daily grind in Rome's overcrowded insulae, those glorious, creaky apartment towers, drove many to the welcoming chaos of public bathing complexes, where hired companions were as common as soap. Martial, the satirist from the late 1st century AD, joked that he could find companionship for rent before he could find clean water. So priorities. Pause, the result. Rome's grand reputation for morals was propped up by a thriving, unashamed marketplace in pleasure. Their civilization was built literally on the backs and other parts of its poorest citizens. And before anyone gets too smug about progress, consider this. 2,000 years later, the same old debates rage on, only now the street corners have better lighting. Did Rome fall because it was too decadent? Or did its brand of open vice just guarantee it would always be remembered? Pause. But if you think Rome's marketplace of pleasure was disturbing, what we're about to explore next will redefine your ideas of entertainment and cruelty. Because while some Romans bought intimacy by the hour, even more paid for blood by the minute. Speaking of which, let's step through the velvet curtain of the arena and witness the unfiltered spectacle that made the Colosseum thunder. Why Rome simply couldn't get enough of the blood games. Arena floors washed in scandal, senators betting fortunes, and the crowd chanting for another encore. Now that's entertainment, Roman style. Pause, now that we've explored the lucrative underbelly of Rome's companionship for hire industry. A bedroom empire that would make even the most decadent Netflix drama look quaint. It's time to turn up the intensity. Because, as shocking as Rome's appetite for paid passion was, it's still amateur hour compared to the city's obsession with bloodshed. If you thought Romans were progressive by legalizing pleasure for coins, just wait until you see what they called a good afternoon's entertainment. Pause, we move from rooms perfumed with incense and coin to amphitheaters drenched in iron and screams. Rome wasn't just the world's premier provider of intimacy for hire. It was also the global capital of public carnage across centuries. The Colosseum and its less famous siblings became the stages for a parade of violence, so creative, systematic, and horrifying that modern sports broadcasts start to look like toddler recess. Why the switch from silk sheets to sand and blood? Because in Rome, violence wasn't a byproduct of chaos. It was a social event, a business, a political tool, and a psychological vice piped straight into the mass psyche. Gladiator battles, executions with flair, mass beast slaughters, and entire populations staged as pizza toppings for lions. All woven into the fabric of entertainment, state building, and let's face it, pure sadism. Forget popcorn, bring your best screams. But wait, there's more disturbing evidence. While luxury lovers snuck quietly through back doors, the proud citizen lined up at the gates of Hell's Theater, clutching tickets they'd proudly show their grandchildren. When I was your age, little Gaius, 500 criminals got dismembered before lunchtime, and we still made it home for a nap. Pause. Julius Caesar, Augustus, Nero. These aren't just names on marble. They're the original producers of the ultimate reality show, where a bad review meant literal death. And here's the twist. Rome's taste for blood wasn't just higher up the social ladder. From senatorial seats to the plebeian mob, everyone indulged. What could possibly go wrong? Well, when everyone's solution to boredom is throwing an entire amphitheater-sized homicide party, things tend to get intense. Let's set the scene. The Roman amphitheater system wasn't a handful of infamous locations. No, try hundreds. By the 1st century AD, Suetonius estimates over 200 amphitheaters dotted the empire, from Britain's Chester to North Africa's El Jem. The Flavian Amphitheater, which we lovingly call the Colosseum, opened in 80 AD under Titus. Not for 80, not for 800, but for 100 days straight of slaughter, as recounted by Dio Cassius. Gladiators, wild hunts, mock naval battles, yes, they flooded the place, mass executions, and more. The Romans called this munera, which originally meant gift. Look, I know gift-giving cultures have their quirks, but offering an afternoon of mass decapitation is one for the etiquette books. Suetonius vividly describes how Emperor Augustus gave games in which 5,000 wild beasts of all kinds were killed in a single day. That's not an exaggeration. That's an extinction-level event deliberately scheduled to boost Augustus's ratings and pay tribute to what the crowd wanted: excess and spectacle. One can imagine his speech. For the continued glory of Rome, and also because my popularity is dipping, please enjoy these thousands of deaths on the house. Pause. Not to be outdone, Nero liked to combine his passions. According to Tacitus, he dressed condemned prisoners in animal skins and set wild dogs upon them, calling it an artistic exhibition. You know the phrase, the show must go on. Well, in Nero's Rome, the show must leave a stain that never washes out of the city's psyche. And lest you think it was all professional fighters, let's take a look at executions as entertainment. Pliny the Elder detailed the famous morning routine. You started early with breakfast, got a bit of mass crucifixion or burning alive with your bread, and then moved on to the headline event, gladiators, in the afternoon. Lovely. That's a wellness routine Peloton wouldn't dare market. If we break down the psychology, Rome's violent games served multiple overlapping neural needs. There was catharsis. Give the mob a release valve for all their pent-up rage at tax collectors, landlords, and cheating lovers. There was tribalism. Cheer for your favorite gladiator the way a modern city hosts a Super Bowl parade. Only your guy dies if he fumbles. There was political theater. Emperor says, "Look how powerful I am. I can order 100 lions shipped from Africa just to have them maul 50 unlucky prisoners, and none of you can stop me." And then there was raw curiosity. How will this new execution method work? We have descriptions from Seneca the Younger of criminals sewn into sacks with wild animals and tossed into rivers. Yep, the original Roman escape room. No survivors, though. Livy tells us of decimatio. If a Roman legion mutinied, commanders would have every 10th soldier clubbed to death by his own comrades, just to set an example. Motivational Mondays were a bit different in the ancient world. Let's not forget the economic engine behind the spectacles. Gladiators weren't just disposable pawns, they were investments. Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiator school next to the Colosseum, trained, housed, and managed hundreds, even thousands of men, sometimes women, destined to be living content for the world's deadliest subscription service. Owners paid fortunes for prime fighters, and like today's sports agents, they hedged bets, sold tickets, and made a killing both literally and financially. When Pliny the Younger lamented in his letters about the excesses of the games, he wasn't exaggerating. The games were so all-consuming that businesses shut down. The entire Roman calendar was re-engineered to fit in more killing time. Dio Cassius estimated that on some festival days, Rome would screen more horror than a slasher film marathon, except all the screams were painfully real. Where did all this leave actual Romans? Socially, the games were the great equalizer. Senators might get the best seats, but even the poorest citizen got a front-row lesson in what the state was capable of. Dio records Augustus once had a herald shout, "If Rome were to fall, let it fall surrounded by spectacles." Pause sounds melodramatic, but with the empire's social fabric held together by bread, circuses, and blood, it was less prophecy than policy. And what about those who refused to play along? Christian martyrs and rebellious slaves are typically romanticized today, but Tacitus and Suetonius paint a harsher picture. Early Christians were publicly burned, torn apart, or simply used to light up the night, as Nero preferred. Rebels like Spartacus, the ultimate gladiator gone wild, held up a mirror the Romans hated to look into. What happens when your entertainment learns to fight back? The answer, as usual for Rome, total war, a line of crucified slaves stretching from Capua to Rome as a warning billboard. Now, if you're getting uncomfortable, good. That's about the same as the underpaid slave forced to battle a professional killer for a crowd's momentary amusement. Pause. But if you're secretly curious about who would applaud all this, look no further than today's world. Crowds still cheer knockouts and car crashes, and box office records fall for the most violent movies. But Romans didn't just want the illusion, they needed the body count. Political candidates sponsored games to win votes. Business moguls funded executions to advertise their wealth. Emperors measured their reigns by deaths delivered, not peace achieved. There's also the not-so-little detail that Rome shipped in thousands of exotic animals: lions, tigers, crocodiles, even elephants, from across the empire just to be slaughtered for fun. Pliny cataloged the shocking loss of animal life, hinting at a kind of ecological warfare disguised as amusement. Imagine ordering elephants by the dozen like pizza to impress your dinner guests, and you're close to Rome's idea of hospitality. Pause, and before you write it off as an ancient quirk, the modern parallels are genuinely awkward. Gladiatorial combat was the original crossover entertainment, blending sports, reality TV, grindhouse horror, and public executions. Imagine the Super Bowl halftime show immediately followed by a live execution. Then ask yourself if we've really evolved that far. As for the psychological fallout, Suetonius muses morbidly on how Rome's insatiable lust for spectacle eventually bled back into every other part of society. When death itself becomes a game, is there anything left the mob wouldn't cheer? But Rome's endless appetite for blood wasn't just violence for its own sake. It was ritualized, theorized, even moralized, as if a beheading was proof of civilization. As Seneca put it, he who has seen a man die by sword cannot help but think less of his own death. Stoic wisdom, or the kind of dark optimism you need to keep running a murder economy. Every aspect of Rome, from government to religion to the family dinner table, was eventually saturated in the byproducts of amphitheater spectacle. Speaking of systematic violence, The bizarre ceremonies we're about to uncover will make assassination look like child's play, from competitive feasting that would put hot dog contests to shame, to priests in masks channeling supernatural paranoia. Rome twisted ritual into a circus of psychological mayhem. If you thought mass murder was strange, wait until you see what Romans did when they really let their hair down. Pause, get ready. Forbidden feasts and unsettling religious games are next, and trust me, you won't want to eat before watching. The systematic violence and assassination we've witnessed in Roman arenas wasn't just a sport or a method of population control. It was a template for how Romans approached all of life's difficulties. If you thought slicing open your enemies in front of a howling mob was unsettling, don't worry, the day didn't end there. No, Romans had a whole banquet of depravity planned for afterward, because nothing cleanses the palate after disemboweling a rival like a 7-course meal in a room designed for mandatory self-induced regurgitation. Pause, and what better accompaniment to bloodstains and martyrdom than a little light pagan superstition, always just a whisper away from total madness. Remember, Rome didn't just invent the gladiator fight. They perfected it as a social event with snacks, gossip, and lots of questionable afterparties. After all, what's the point of an empire if you can't indulge every urge in the most theatrical way possible? But the gladiators, and the occasional senator who got on the wrong side of an imperial migraine, were just appetizer violence. Here's the main course, the feasts. The real show wasn't in the arena. It was sprawled on a couch with your toga slipping and bits of roasted peacock stuck in your teeth. Pause, public violence bled seamlessly into private spectacle. What emerges from this evidence is a pattern of systematic madness that turned every Roman home into a theater for social climbing, psychological warfare, and ritualistic one-upmanship. The Domus, a family home, was less a serene haven than a high-stakes Game of Thrones episode with worse food and more superstitions. But wait, there's more disturbing evidence. If you're imagining a dignified candlelit dinner with Cicero and friends, forget everything Hollywood has ever sold you. Ancient sources like Seneca and Juvenal don't describe banquets as thoughtful philosophical gatherings. They paint them as competitive, barely disguised vomitoriums of gluttony, paranoia, and revenge. And when pigs weren't flying, or at least being devoured whole, they were being sacrificed in rituals, so bizarre even local gods needed a prescription for Xanax. Pause, let's set the scene. It's 54 AD in the heart of Rome. Enter Gaius Petronius, better known as the Arbiter of Elegance, hosting a banquet worthy of a pharmaceutical ad for indigestion. According to his Satyricon, these gatherings included menu items like dormice dipped in honey, sow's udders, and for those special guests, a little segment known as forced entertainment. This was less, let's watch fireworks after dinner, and more, let's see who we can publicly humiliate with improvised poetry battles, feet-washing slaves, and prank food sculpted in the shapes of human body parts. Suetonius recounts that Emperor Vitellius once enjoyed a feast featuring 2,000 different dishes of fish and 7,000 birds. Because, as every modern nutritionist would agree, nothing says healthy living like consuming the animal equivalent of an entire ecosystem in one sitting. But these feasts weren't just about caloric intake and bragging about your latest slave purchase. They doubled as psychological warfare. Seating arrangements were everything. Who got to recline where? Who received the freshest eel? Social humiliation was only ever a spilled wine cup away. And underneath it all, a simmering fear. The anxious possibility that your gracious host was planning your poisoning as dessert. Just another course in the endless Roman menu. Tacitus documents banquet poisonings and snide toasts that became death sentences. The closer you sat to power, the closer you came to a literal gut check. Which brings us to the infamous vomitoria, a word that still sends shivers down the collective spine of high school Latin students, not to mention YouTube comment sections. Despite what you might think, the vomitorium wasn't a Roman bathroom, nor a dedicated room for post-pig-out purging. at least in the architectural sense. Instead, vomitoria were passageways in amphitheaters, designed for rapid crowd evacuation. But the truly revolting part, Roman literature makes it clear. The idea of eating to the point of regurgitation was celebrated, practiced, even by the most elite. Seneca, always the life of the party, derides partygoers who vomit so they may eat, and eat so they may vomit. In plain terms, repeat until social standing or intestines give way, whichever comes first. And this wasn't even considered the lowest of the low. Petronius describes guests keeping a feather or a perfumed napkin on hand to stimulate a little pre-dessert reverse peristalsis behind a curtain. Imagine inviting your boss for a dinner party, only to discover a discreet corner for upchucking before dessert. Pause, that's right. The height of status wasn't measured by restraint, but by your ability to process and, well, return the favor to your host. But what's a delta of decadence without rampant superstition? Romans couldn't lay out a table or carve a roast without checking the auspices, the entrails, or at least the general direction of the wind. Pliny the Elder, a man so obsessed with omens he'd have given weather forecasters a run for their money, documents endless examples of soothsayers being summoned before the appetizers to check whether Jupiter approved of tonight's entertainment. Spoiler alert, Jupiter almost never cared, but it was a fantastic excuse for priests to demand another bribe. Birds flying the wrong way, sacrifice another chicken, wine spilled. Quick, call the haruspics. Only a sheep's liver will tell us if dessert is safe. Of course, the really bizarre rituals didn't end at the dinner table. Take the Saturnalia festival, a December blowout that somehow makes modern New Year's Eve look like a faculty meeting. During this unstructured celebration, slaves were granted their master's seats at the table. Dice games replaced political intrigues, and everyone wore silly hats called pilei, the ancient world's version of a party crown. Sounds charming. Well, mixed into all this merry role reversal were drunken rampages, public nudity, and the kind of liberated behavior that left even the gods reaching for a glass of the good Falernian. And for those seeking a deeper flavor of derangement, consider the cult of Magna Mater, the Great Mother. Her priests, documented by Livy and Ovid, displayed their piety by holding raucous public parades featuring loud music, wild dancing, and the annual highlight, self-castration. That's right, for devotees looking to level up their supernatural insurance policies, scissors to the nether regions did the trick. Livy records the shocked reactions of the Roman establishment to the sight of blood-soaked initiates parading through the streets, though to be fair, after a day of chariot crashes and public executions, the bar was pretty high for what counted as disturbing. Yet amid the chaos, ritual, and indigestion, the real madness was in the everyday. Talisman-laden necks, love potions mixed by charlatans, and a bustling trade in curses scratched onto sheets of lead, defictions, each one a handwritten request for another person's downfall. For the right price, you too could ensure your neighbor's horses ran backward, your rival's business failed, or, if you were feeling generous, that your latest crush finally called you back. It was 1 part magic, 9 parts petty revenge, and all parts deeply Roman. Let's add a little psychological analysis to the cauldron. Romans weren't just binge eaters or compulsive party throwers. They displayed the classic signs of a civilization obsessed with control through spectacle and ritual, the unpredictability of politics, the ever-present threat of assassination or exile, the dizzying social ladder, all of it demanded compensatory excess. If you couldn't outrun a dagger in the forum, you could at least overindulge, humiliate your rivals, and hedge your bets with a few sacrifices to Saturn or Bacchus on the side. There's a pattern of systematic madness here that goes beyond mere gluttony. The feasts, the forced vomiting, the ritual humiliations, they were about staking your claim in an environment where status was everything and tomorrow was never guaranteed. The culture of the banquet was perfectly mirrored in the imperial politics of the day. Excess, paranoia, backstabbing, sometimes literally, and a frantic need for public display layered over private anxiety. And underlying it all, a confidence that if the gods didn't currently favor you, you could at least bribe or terrify them into compliance with enough animal sacrifice and ritual excess. The religious implications were downright dizzying. Whether it was the Eleusinian mysteries imported from Greece, the festival of Lupercalia, basically a fertility parade involving half-naked men hitting women with goat hides for good luck, as noted by Plutarch, or the emperor's own nightly consultations with astrologers and haruspices, Roman ritual life was an unpredictable blend of deep-seated fear and anything-goes entertainment. On any given day, a Roman could be found consulting a seer about the proper date for opening a bottle of wine, or chanting curses upon the heads of everyone within spitting distance. It gets better, or worse. The reality of all this feasting, ritual, and superstition is summed up beautifully by Juvenal in his satires, who lampoons a society where personal relationships are transactional, gods are on permanent retainer, and food is never, ever just food. With this kind of precedent, is it really any surprise that Roman emperors began believing their own divinity? When your dinner parties routinely feature live animals, staged drownings, hello, Emperor Nero, and a light sprinkling of religious terror, delusions of grandeur come with the territory, served hot, possibly still moving. If you're starting to see a pattern no suburban PTA meeting could replicate, you're not wrong. The distances between entertainment, religious awe, and unhinged superstition were as narrow as the gap between emperor and corpse. At every turn, rituals functioned both as tools of social glue and instruments of collective insanity, their effects spilling out from elite banquets to the very foundation of imperial order. Rome's legacy isn't just monuments and law codes, it's the rituals, bizarre and obscene, that kept everyone just sane enough to show up for work the next day. Or at least, alive enough to hire another haruspics. Because when raw power is measured in overflowing dishes and little lead curses, who needs a therapist? And if you thought those rituals were the height of Roman madness, wait until you meet the quacks and oracles who provided intellectual justification for all of this insanity. All of this systematic depravity was justified through what Romans proudly called knowledge. Prepare to meet the medical charlatans, the neuroscientists of goat livers, and the apocalyptic fortune tellers, who made the impossible seem like standard procedure. Pause. The wild orgies of superstition and ceremonial excess we just surveyed were certainly a sight to behold. Roman society gorging itself, vomiting up both morals and morals, only to dive right back in for another questionable helping. But if you thought the rituals and festive chaos were alarming, just wait until we see who was keeping Rome healthy and wise. Because while the altars smoldered and the libations flowed, an entirely separate, equally deranged industry was hard at work, the long, proud tradition of Roman pseudoscience. And let's not mince words. After watching noble senators empty their stomachs just to stuff them again, and watching fortune seekers wrestle with bird entrails, it's only natural to wonder, how exactly did Rome justify such a delirious carousel of excess? Why would the res publica, in all its glory, become so invested in omens, miracle concoctions, and diagnosis by goose liver? Pause. The answer, of course, is that the so-called learned men of Rome were as deluded, corrupt, and occasionally hilarious as any snake oil influencer today. The difference: in Rome, most of them actually wore a snake, usually around their staff, because nothing says medical expertise like borrowing accessories from the god Asclepius. Picture this: a city bustling with self-declared healers, priestly augurs, and enough open-air clinics to make WebMD look like Harvard. These weren't just back-alley quacks, either. These were the highest-paid, most respected minds in the empire, lauded by emperors and feared by the masses. Their credentials came not from institutions, but from the ability to tell you with a straight face that your headache was caused by a displeased household spirit. Or, better still, the wrong alignment of Jupiter and Venus. As you might expect, This left the door wide open for a golden age of mystical medicine, pop-up cults, and a level of gullibility that makes today's wellness grifts look almost charming. So how did science get so, well, scientific in ancient Rome? Let's go back to the 1st century CE, a period when Augustus was still worried about his legacy. Claudius was probably being poisoned, and the definition of research mostly involved trial and error, plus a hearty distrust of bathing more than once every Saturnalia. Leading this medical revolution was Galen, the darling of the imperial court and self-professed expert in, well, just about everything. Galen's research involved vivisecting monkeys, analyzing gladiator wounds, and prescribing remedies that sound better suited for a potion shop. Ground viper flesh for headaches, boiled beaver oil for anything vaguely respiratory, and should all else fail, a diet rich in cabbage. Because what could possibly go wrong with an expert chef who follows medical recipes as wild as the feasts we just endured? But wait, there's more disturbing evidence. Galen wasn't even the weirdest. Pliny the Elder, ever keen to help, wrote an entire multi-volume encyclopedia of natural history that positioned the humble cow dung poultice as the answer to nearly every ailment, from sore throats to romantic disappointment. Even Suetonius, more preoccupied with imperial gossip, couldn't resist cataloging some of Nero's favorite medical routines, which apparently involved ritual bloodletting, amulets carved from human teeth, and the occasional consultation with a professional dream interpreter. You know, just your everyday Roman healthcare plan. How did Romans fall for this? The answer is a mess of poorly understood biology, rampant religious fervor, and enough intellectual corruption to fill a vomitorium or two. The Roman scientist, such as he was, enjoyed the power to invent a diagnosis for every situation and charge a premium for fixing imaginary disorders. One day it's melancholy caused by black bile, the next it's divine punishment manifesting as gout or, heaven forbid, premature baldness. Psychological analysis isn't just tempting, it's practically mandatory. The real genius of these experts was understanding this simple truth. In an anxious civilization, the fear of invisible threats sells, and sells spectacularly. Just look at the cultish reverence paid to the oracle at Delphi, whose cryptic proclamations could launch wars, end dynasties, or, at minimum, encourage you to avoid figs for a month. But let's not forget the homegrown Roman omens, the haruspices, priests who read the future by pawing through animal entrails. In the heart of the forum, senators might anxiously consult Lucius Petronius, famed or infamous for his uncanny ability to extract political advice from the soggy livers of sacrificial goats. Did the curve seem odd? Clearly, the gods want war. Did the color look off? Surely, a plague is coming. Everyone watched, everyone believed, and everyone paid handsomely for the pleasure. The historian Livy rattles off stories of entire campaigns paused for weeks while experts bickered over the meaning of a particularly squishy sheep spleen. What's more, the emperor himself, Augustus Tiberius Caligula, pick your favorite, rarely made a move without a consultation, ensuring Rome's fate was marked by bovine digestion as much as strategic wisdom. This was science as performance art, medicine as theater, and religion as the ultimate authority. Could anything possibly go wrong? Pause. Well, considering most Romans died well before 50, and a stubbed toe could escalate into full-blown gangrene courtesy of an innovative herbal compress, the answer is yes. And yet, no one ever seems to have learned. The real showstoppers were the oracles, those cryptic mouthpieces for the gods whose entire livelihood depended on clouding every answer in plausible deniability. The Oracle of Delphi, yes, the one with the famous "Know Thyself," was widely rumored to get her visions by inhaling ethylene gas from natural vents. Rome was so enraptured that senators would travel for days, then return convinced a badly translated poem was the surest path to military success. Meanwhile, closer to home, the Sibylline books, supposed tomes of destiny locked in the Capitoline temple, were wheeled out during every crisis. Their advice, cryptic, nonsensical, and often profoundly unhelpful, unless you were hoping to swap disaster for a lucrative round of temple restoration contracts. Galen, Pliny, Celsus, and their ilk all proudly attached their names to cures now best used as cautionary tales. Want to stay young and robust? According to Celsus, regular bloodletting and a spot of honey rinsed up the nose should do the trick. Pliny suggested swallowing crushed emeralds, presumably for the same reason that today's multi-level marketing reps swear by healing crystals. And when all else failed, Rome could always fall back on importing the latest Greek wisdom, usually filtered through a haze of mistranslations and wishful thinking. But perhaps the greatest sin of Roman pseudoscience was its absolute, institutionalized blindness to actual inquiry. The great thinkers of Rome prized theory over experiment, charisma over data, and tradition over progress. If you could cite Hippocrates, however poorly, you were golden. If not, better keep a handy stash of bird guts and hope no one noticed the pungent odor. Of course, it would be easy to scoff at the ancients, sneering at their fondness for cow dung bandages and perfumed omens. But let's fast forward a couple of millennia. How much has really changed? The modern world, with all its gleaming clinics and endless wellness fads, is still haunted by ghosts of Roman logic. We may not scrape sheep's livers for government policy, but we certainly do check the stars before investing. Bloodletting is out of vogue, but juice cleanses, cupping, and oil pulling have stepped right up to fill the vacuum. The language shifts, but the logic lingers. A persistent belief that a charismatic expert, a miracle pill, or a vague cosmic alignment can solve our most urgent anxieties. The echoes are thunderous. For every Galen brewing up a new cure, there's a modern influencer peddling raw water or biohacked coffee. For every oracle muttering cryptic doom, there's a Silicon Valley prophet promising you immortality at the low, low price of your skepticism. And for every senator hunched over a goat liver, there's a policymaker nervously scanning poll numbers, as if the future can be read in the entrails of public opinion. Intellectual corruption is less about malice and more about desperation, the desperate need for certainty, leadership, and occasionally, a quick fix. In Rome, experts manufactured confidence by the amphora. Today, they live stream it in high definition. And just as the masses once flocked to the temples, the modern world swipes, subscribes, and shares, hoping that the next expert will finally have the answer nobody else does. So there we have it, the final pillar of Roman corruption, the systematic transformation of ignorance into expertise, superstition into science, and charlatanism into wisdom. From the bedroom empire to the blood-soaked halls, from bizarre rituals to pseudoscientific madness, we've witnessed how absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it creates entire systems of delusion. Pause, but what does it all mean? What can we learn from this journey through the darkest corners of the Eternal City? As we prepare for our final wrap-up, we'll drag every vice, every scandal, and every comforting myth blinking into the sunlight. One last time, stay with us as we unravel the ultimate lesson behind Rome's scandalous vices and what the long shadow of the empire still casts over our world today. So there you have it, your absolutely thrilling journey through boring old history. We've explored 4 pillars of Roman corruption that, when combined, created a blueprint for how civilizations destroy themselves from within. The marketplace of carnal commerce, the grand arena of blood spectacles, the twisted theater of ritual madness, and the profitably unscientific world of pseudo-expertise. But these weren't separate phenomena. They were interconnected parts of a single system, each feeding, justifying, and amplifying the other, until depravity became the official language of power. Pause, let's roll all these vices into one convenient amphora and ask what kind of beverage Rome was really serving. The economy of pleasure for coin wasn't just tolerated, it became state policy, as senators debated regulations while indulging in the fruits of deeply unequal societies. This open indulgence in transactional intimacy wasn't a lonely vice. It was both a training ground and a flare. If everything is for sale, then so too is decency. The next logical step: turn public suffering, violence, and spectacle into your national pastime. The arena wasn't an outlier. It was a product of a system that decided if one body could be bought, so could another soul be broken for applause. Tie that to the erosion of boundaries at the Roman feast, where humiliation doubled as camaraderie and excess replaced self-control, and you get a culture addicted to games of power, status, and psychodrama. A ruling class so nervy about its own fragility that status anxiety spilled from the vomitorium to the Senate floor. And all of it marinated in ritual and superstition, engineered to explain, excuse, and escalate the madness. Anyone who couldn't bribe the goddess of luck could always hire a haruspex or magician, just as every emperor with a nervous tic had a coterie of astrologers, prophets, and bloodletters whispering personalized secrets from animal entrails. This is not just a history of vice. It is a civilization-wide blueprint for converting vice into virtue. Every structure, economic, social, religious, intellectual, bent to manufacture, monetize, and mystify corruption. The psychology is textbook. Endless need for control breeding paranoia, which breeds ritual excess, which in turn breeds intellectual grift. Each vice didn't exist alone. It justified, subsidized, or made plausible the next. Sexual exploitation as a public utility needed the brutal enforcement of order, which needed ritual compassion or divine approval, which needed experts to keep the farce going. No sphere was safe. They all worked together to ensure corruption was not just common but foundational. Why do these elements always travel together? Because in any system where power is absolute and accountability is optional, the lines between desire, violence, belief, and truth dissolve. What's a little child sacrifice if the gods demand it? What's an afternoon of mass execution if the crowd roars its approval? What's quack science if it coddles your anxieties or ties up political loose ends? Rome just cranked each lever until the machine ran solely on vice, and then built temples to it. Pause. If Rome sounds disturbingly familiar, congratulations. Your pattern recognition is working. Let us take a darkly optimistic scroll through the present. Track the trajectory of Segment 1, the commodification of intimacy and pleasure, from the graffiti-scrawled luminaria straight to modern society's endless debates about regulated vice, exploitation, and the economics of human bodies. Today's politicians may not wear colored togas, but the euphemisms are identical. Regulated industries, personal freedoms, wellness professionals, and occasionally, escort scandals at campaign fundraisers. Our news feeds are littered with powerful men and women brought low by hidden bedrooms, secret cash, and attempts to legislate the boundaries between private vice and public virtue. Segment 2's bloodlust finds its echoes in every mass spectacle that combines violence with commercial intent. A formula alive and thriving from UFC cages to true crime documentaries to social media's viral humiliation. We might not crucify rebels on the Appian Way, but the internet mob does an outstanding job using shame, cancellation, or just good old-fashioned doxing as modern gladiatorial combat. Public catharsis through suffering sells as much, if not more, than 2,000 years ago. Our cultish cravings from Segment 3 are everywhere. Personality-driven political movements, influencer worship, ritualized hazings masquerading as team building, and a wellness industry that makes Saturnalia look like a church picnic. Corporate retreats, biohacking conventions, and motivational seminars. Pick your flavor of ritualized madness, all promising a path out of existential anxiety, status confusion, or just garden variety boredom. The props have changed, but the longing for meaning through spectacle is identical. And the final Roman pillar, a glittering empire of pseudo-expertise and magical thinking, pulls a long shadow over the modern age. Replace haruspices with social media influencers hawking brain dust and miracle cures. Swap the oracles of Delphi for cable news prophets and investment gurus, parsing economic entrails. Where Rome debated Galen's viper elixirs, we debate the latest probiotic cleanse or cryptocurrency pitch, all the while flattering ourselves that we'd never swallow literal emeralds. Only the conceptual ones, thank you, the thirst for certainty, and the willingness to buy it from anyone with a convincing label, never left. Pause. In practical terms, the psychology at play remains immutable. Give a few the power to define reality, insulate them from consequence, reward their vices, and sooner or later, every vice will become policy, every policy a superstition, every superstition a science, and every science another weapon for control. The specifics, pleasure dens, slaughterhouses, feasts, snake oil remedies, are just background noise. What matters is the system. Every solution to existential dread, status anxiety, and political uncertainty gets commodified, brutalized, dramatized, and just for good measure, certified by an expert. You get what you incentivize, and Rome incentivized vice dressed as virtue at every societal level. And so, the long-term legacy is less about marble ruins and more about the echoing, institutionalized patterns that survive collapse. Rome's appetite for corruption outlived its legions and columns, survived through church councils, royal courts, parliament scandals, reality TV networks, and every place where power is its own rationale. These mechanisms didn't vanish. They just shed their togas, threw on business suits, and rebranded the vomitorium as the networking lunch. Perhaps the most perverse lesson of all is this: Rome didn't fall because barbarian hordes were stronger. It collapsed because absolute power had transformed every institution into a theater of corruption. The brothel, the amphitheater, the banquet hall, the temple, and the clinic all became stages for the same performance: the systematic conversion of vice into virtue through the alchemy of power and propaganda. And if you think this is just ancient history, well, look around. The costumes have changed, but the play remains the same. Sweet dreams, and remember, this is just the stuff that made it into the official records. Pause so next time someone tells you history is boring, remind them that civilization's true legacy lies somewhere between scandal, spectacle, cult, and charlatanism. A symphony of indulgence that still plays, quietly or loudly, under every new regime. The names may be different, but the script never changes. The human craving for certainty, spectacle, and validation, handed to the powerful and dressed up as destiny. Welcome to civilization. Now let's see if anyone learns the lesson before the final curtain falls. Pause.